Hey everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I'm happy to be doing a video about a novel that was recommended to me from a YouTube subscriber, Telma ML. I believe you are Brazilian, and so you read Clarice Lispector's The Passion According to GH in Portuguese and recommended it to me. Of course, I had to read it in English. But this is a wonderful novel, so thank you very much. So far, every recommendation I've gotten from subscribers has been excellent. Published in 1964, this is the New Directions paperback with the translation by Idra Novi. This is a new author to me, so the very first thing I did was check to see just how far out of the loop I was, and I consulted my Norton Anthology of World Literature for the 20th century, and sure enough, Clarice Lispector was one of the chosen authors in there. And so, you know, immediately I'm like, okay, well, she was at least on the radar enough to be included in a Norton Anthology. So, you know, shame on me for not knowing about her, but we have to learn about people at some time, right? So thank you again, Telma ML. The next thing I did was I checked with a Brazilian colleague of mine at work. There's a big population of Brazilians there, mostly from Curitiba. And I just looked at him and I said, hey, I want to start writing a name on a whiteboard. You tell me if you recognize it. And he knows I'm a big reader, so as soon as I was done writing Clarice, he goes, oh yeah, Clarice Lispector. I've never read her, but I've heard a lot about her. So that says a lot, because this guy has probably read maybe 3 books in his life, and all of those were on like business intelligence architecture or something like that. He did say that is a really weird name for a Brazilian, but Norton clears that up here in the monograph on Clarice Lispector. It says, she was born in December 1925 in a small town in Ukraine as her parents, Russian Jewish immigrants, made the long trip to a new home in Brazil. The family arrived in Brazil when she was 2 months old. So she was actually Ukrainian by birth, but had Brazilian sentiments mixed in with whatever she gleaned from her parents. I also like to try to just look at some introductory or prefatory matters to try and get an idea of what I'm about to approach with a new author. Norton says, Lispector is best known as a writer of intense, tightly structured short stories that portray the external world through a character's innermost thoughts and feelings, and that explore sensual perceptions to gain an intuitive knowledge beyond words. That perfectly describes the Passion According to GH. In the introduction by Caetano Veloso, it says, the language that transformed itself in order to allow an event to emerge with the power of an epiphany amidst the humdrum concerns of normal life, usually a woman's life. And that's exactly what we get in the Passion According to GH as well. Not much takes place in the external world around her. She basically sits at a kitchen table, kneading some bread, goes out on the balcony for a smoke, decides she wants to clean her maid's bedroom, goes into the maid's room, ends up discovering a cockroach, smashes it, and that's it. That's pretty much all that happens. And so if this were a play, it would be a one-set play and no stage crew needed. But there's this pyrotechnical cosmos that occurs for the whole story within her. And in very simple language, she grasps and grasps to describe the indescribable. To simplify the plot even further, the narrator experiences a schism that divides her old life and her new life. So in her new life, she wants to go back and try to analyze and inspect what exactly happened, and she wants to take us with her. And so the bulk of the text is her walking us with her back through that schism. The structure of the novel, one major element of it is indebted to Dante's Inferno. And in fact, we get these chapters that don't have numbers on them. They're just little, skips without any titles and numbers. So what I like to do when that happens is I like to write in my own numbers. That way, if I need to refer back, I'm not at the mercy of page numbers, but I can actually refer to the chapters. And I'm really glad I did this because we end up with 33 chapters. The number of the main cantos in the Commedia. Of course, in the first one there are technically 34, but that first one, you know, people don't count because that's sort of an introduction. And so there are really 33 in each of them, the Inferno and Purgatorio and the Paradiso in the same way. This one is 33 chapters, but there's also a descent into hell with an unnamed guide holding her hand. And if we look on page 128, we see her say, "I am the one who pulled my hand away because now I must go alone." And so this is like an image of Dante leaving Virgil behind in hell. And then she goes on to say, "If I manage to return from the kingdom of life," and so, you know, looking back on the kingdom of death, and then later we see that she refers to it as the happy hell I had entered. And later she talks about realizing that she had been in the middle of a road, and so it kind of harkens back to the famous opening lines, midway through this life, or, you know, midway through this our mortal life, and so on. So a lot of it with the descent and journey through hell, and the 33 cantos or chapters is indebted to the Inferno. There's also, of course, as the title implies, this is a very biblical title, The Passion According to G.H. It harkens back to, you know, the Gospel according to Matthew, the Gospel according to Mark. There's other passion accounts out there and so on. But two of the theological terms that I'll point out to talk about the structure here, and how the plot is driven, is the Via Crucis, which is Latin for the way of the cross, or it means basically a passion or going through intense pain to come out on the other side. And then a Greek word, kenosis, which is a contested theory. I guess all theories in the realm of theology are contested as elsewhere. But kenosis is this word that Paul uses to describe Jesus emptying himself out on the cross. And a lot of kenosis theorists believe that this means that he completely shed his divinity and became fully man in that moment. And that is the way that Lispector uses it. G.H., our only character in here, she is a sculptor, and in that same manner, she slowly chips away to unveil what exactly happened during this schism. There's an oblique reference to Michelangelo's famous quote. She says, having the experience of patiently wearing down the material until gradually finding its immanent sculpture. And this is exactly in line with Michelangelo said when he said the sculpture is already complete within the marble block. There's a lot of splitting and doubling and repetition. The opening sentence is mimetic. It says, "I'm searching, I'm searching." And so, of course, this the actual writing and repeating of it is like a search. It's like she's searching to get started, but we'll see that she is searching for much more than that. There is this mirroring the schism, because with the schism that took place, there's this splitting, which is also a sort of doubling and a repeating of a whole in now its constituent parts. There are repeated words. Very interestingly, the last sentence of each chapter is also the first sentence of the next chapter, which gives it sort of a fugue-like composition. And then, of course, the imagery of the roach being split in half is the ultimate metaphor and symbol that she uses. The mode of writing is very philosophical, and in that way, she wants to be meticulously precise. So there are all these definitions that she tries to give, and they're actually very enjoyable the way she words them. For example, until now, finding myself was already having an idea of a person and fitting myself into it. Maybe disappointment is the fear of no longer belonging to a system. Arranging is finding the best form. Now, or the concept of now, is time swollen to the limit. Pity is being the child of someone or of something. And this is because, like she says early on, I'm afraid of living whatever I don't understand. And this is the whole purpose for everything we get here. She has lived through something that she doesn't understand, and so she needs us as a reader to walk through it with her. There's a psychoanalytic mode. The whole thing is really an excruciating act, or really performance, of self-analysis at the deepest level I've encountered in literature, perhaps. There's obvious displacement as a coping mechanism or adaptation mechanism. We find out later that she has had an abortion, and so we begin to see that the roach being crushed at the midsection becomes likened to her stomach and waist area, which is where she would have carried the child. And so being crushed at the stomach triggers this repressed memory and anguish. And it says, I recall on page 90, she throws in, I recalled myself roaming the streets knowing I'd have the abortion. And then she goes on to say, I had already known within myself the shiny gaze of a roach captured at the waist. And this is because it's pinned at the door. But these things trigger in her mind this grief, and she then starts dealing with the fact that she has taken a life. Just like she has taken the roach's life, she has also chosen to terminate another life. And some of the atmosphere and feeling that she brings in reminded me of a book I read long ago. It's called Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion. And there's a scene of having an abortion and its after effects and so on. And they're both so poignant and lacerating. Really, the whole thing, I use this term a lot. I feel like maybe it's just the type of literature that comes my way, but it really is a prose poem. And it kind of needs to be because she wants to reach beyond mere phenomena and talk about things, and so she needs that metaphorical language. Some of the examples I have of this beautiful language, no sound, and yet I distinctly felt an emphatic resonance, which was that of silence chafing against silence. For the first time, I was feeling with hellish veracity the desire to have had the children I never had. I wanted to have reproduced, not in 3 or 4 children, but in 20,000, my organic hellishness full of pleasure. My future survival in children would be my true present, which is not just myself, but my pleasurable species never interrupted. Not having had children left me spasmodic as if confronting an addiction denied. And my impersonal soul burns me. The grandiose indifference of a star is the soul of the roach. The star is the very exorbitance of the body of the roach. The roach and I aspire to a peace that cannot be ours. It's a peace beyond the size and destiny of the roach and of me. And because my soul is so unlimited that it is no longer me, and because it is so beyond me, because I am always remote to myself, I am as unreachable to myself as a star is unreachable to me. I contort myself to try to reach the present time that surrounds me, but I am still remote in relation to this very instant. The future, alas, is closer to me than the instant now. Nostalgia is not for the God we are missing. It is the nostalgia for ourselves we are not enough. We miss our impossible grandeur. My unreachable present is my paradise lost. We suffer from being so little hungry, though our small hunger is enough for us to deeply miss the pleasure we would have if our hunger were greater. That is a fantastic line. Some of the symbols and themes that emerge, salt is a big theme. Now that we're thinking in terms of biblical, so we're thinking Jesus wept, tears come out a lot in here. Salt of the earth, which are what people who follow Christ are called in the Bible. But what else does salt do? It extracts flavor, yes, from a situation. But the way that Lispector uses it more is that the salt covers a thing itself. And we see on page 161 that she says, before I needed seasoning for everything, or before the schism, I needed seasoning for everything, or salt for everything. And that was how I leapt over the thing and experienced the taste of the seasoning. In other words, not the taste of the thing itself. And really, if there's a lot of Kantian ding on sick. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, but the thing in itself from Kant and Plato's forms, this realm of forms, or this world that we can't quite access, but that's where the thing in itself is. Perhaps the most amazing visual in here comes really early on. She says, and if I look at light with a magnifying glass, with a shock, I will only see more light. I saw, but am as blind as before I saw, an incomprehensible triangle. And at first that threw me. I thought, what is that triangle? Well, as you can see where I drew a crude little sketch of what happens when you hold a magnifying glass up with the sun coming through it and then burning a hole in a piece of paper, it produces a triangle. And she's talking about looking into that triangle and being blinded and it being incomprehensible. Clarice Lispector, The Passion According to G.H., 1964. I recommend you pick this up, grab the paperback from New Directions, read through it. It is, the best way I can describe it is that it is a pyrotechnic display of a mind on fire with language and psychological understanding and a need to transcend. Like the translator says in the note at the end, even after rereading this novel so often and so intently that I know a number of passages in it by memory, I still feel as if every hair on my head has caught on fire when I reach the end of it. And if all this isn't enough, I'll leave you with a little excerpt from the copy on the back of the paperback. It says, the sight of the dying insect provokes a mystical crisis, at the height of which comes one of the most famous and genuinely shocking scenes in Latin American literature. That's a big claim. Keep in mind, 1964, but it is a shock nonetheless.